At my high school reunion, my old math teacher asked, "Hey, Sweet Cheeks, why don't you come in my car and we'll pick up where we left off?" I froze with my plastic cup halfway to my mouth. Before I could get a real question out, he slapped my man cakes and walked away laughing. I stood there in shock, watching him head toward the exit. Mr. Davidson had been the strictest teacher at our school. The guy who gave detention for using the wrong color pen. Now, he was hitting on me and touching me inappropriately. My best friend Chris saw the whole thing from across the gym. I rushed over to him, still processing what just happened. "I think, Mr. Davidson just invited me to have a freak off in his car." Chris nearly choked on his drink. He looked at me then at the door where Mr. Davidson had disappeared. "I think he got you mixed up for you-know-who." I definitely don't know who. I was completely lost. Chris just laughed and walked away to talk to some other classmates. That wasn't helpful at all. I stood there confused, trying to figure out what I was missing. Who could Mr. Davidson have confused me with, and why would he think I'd want to meet him in his car? I tried to mingle, but couldn't focus on any conversations. Jenny from homeroom was talking about her real estate career, but I kept glancing at the exit. Mike showed off pictures of his twins while I nodded without really seeing them. The whole time, my mind kept replaying Mr. Davidson's words and that oddly intimate butt slap. It kind of felt nice, but there was clearly something everyone knew that I didn't. 3 different people walked by and did double takes when they saw me. One girl from my chemistry class actually gasped and hurried away. What was happening? Did these people think I was sleeping with Mr. Davidson? Miss Garcia from the English department appeared next to me ladling punch. She'd always been the cool teacher who let us eat in class. "So I hear you're married." "Yeah, my wife is homesick with the baby now." I smiled, thinking about Sarah dealing with our 6-month-old's fever. Miss Garcia raised her eyebrows. "Oh, so you have a wife, I see." "Yeah?" I didn't understand her tone. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "I think it's better she stayed home anyway, considering Mr. Davidson is here. I heard you two had quite the time on your 18th birthday." Then she walked away, leaving me more confused than ever. I hardly even remember my 18th birthday party. All I remember was getting super drunk and waking up on my parents' front lawn. For all I know, Mr. Davidson hadn't been anywhere near us. Something was seriously wrong here. I wandered around the gym trying to act normal. By the snack table, I overheard Tommy Packett telling a group, "Can you believe he showed up knowing Davidson would be here? What a freak." They all turned to stare at me before quickly looking away. I couldn't enjoy the reunion after that. I decided that's it. I needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to me, Mr. Davidson. I pushed through the double doors and walked outside. The parking lot was packed, and I couldn't find Mr. Davidson's car. I walked past a Tesla and someone's midlife crisis Corvette, looking for one specific vehicle. Sure enough, Mr. Davidson's old Chevy was parked in the back corner away from the lights. I could see him sitting in the driver's seat, looking at his phone and scratching his crotch. My heart was pounding as I walked over. This was insane, but I needed to know what was going on. The car windows were slightly fogged, and I could hear soft music playing inside. I think it was Marvin Gaye. For a second, I considered turning back, but I needed to understand why this guy slapped my man cheeks and if he did something on my birthday. I knocked on his window and he jumped. When he saw me, his face lit up and he quickly unlocked the door. I slid into the passenger seat, feeling like I was making a huge mistake, but too curious to stop. "Oh, thank God, Clay, I thought you'd never come." He reached over and put his hand on my knee. My entire world changed. "Clay?" That's my younger brother. His hand stayed on my knee while I sat there frozen, trying to process what he just said. I pulled my leg away fast and scooted toward the door. "There's been a huge misunderstanding, Mr. Davidson." My voice came out weird and shaky. His face went from excited to confused to completely white in about 3 seconds. He stared at me for a long moment, then his eyes got really wide. "You're not Clay." It wasn't a question. "No, I'm his older brother." He started stammering something about this being an old joke between teachers and how they sometimes mess around at reunions. His hands were shaking bad as he gripped the steering wheel, and he wouldn't look at me at all. I could tell he was lying because his neck was turning red, and he kept swallowing hard. The whole car smelled like old coffee and whatever cologne he dumped on himself. I grabbed the door handle and got out as fast as I could. The Marvin Gaye was still playing through his speakers while I walked around the back of his car. I pulled out my phone and took a quick photo of his license plate just in case I needed it later. My hands were shaking too, but for different reasons. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what this meant for Clay. I walked back toward the gym but couldn't go inside, so I stood in the parking lot and texted Chris. "It's about Clay, not me. Call me." I watched the message show as delivered, but he didn't respond. That's when it hit me that Chris probably knew this all along, and that's why he was being weird earlier. The drive home took forever, even though it was only 15 minutes. Sarah was waiting up on the couch with the baby who was crying and hot with fever. She looked exhausted, but also worried when she saw my face. I told her the basics about Davidson confusing me for Clay and touching me in his car. She shifted the baby to her other arm and asked if the old rumors were actually about my brother. I hadn't even thought about it that way, but it made sense. The baby kept crying, so I took him and walked around the living room while Sarah heated up a bottle. I tried calling Clay, but it went straight to voicemail, which wasn't unusual since he never answered his phone. Sarah came back with the bottle and suggested we focus on the baby tonight and deal with this tomorrow. She was right, but I couldn't stop thinking about Davidson's face when he realized I wasn't Clay. After Sarah went to bed around midnight, I sat on the couch with my phone. The baby was finally sleeping in his crib, and the house was quiet except for the dishwasher running. I opened Facebook and searched for our old high school alumni group. It took some scrolling, but I found an old thread from years ago about our class. There were vague comments about the birthday incident, and people arguing about which brother it really was. My stomach felt sick reading through all these posts. People I'd known for years had been talking about this behind my back. I started taking screenshots of everything I could find. Lucy Carpenter had commented a lot on the thread and seemed to know more than she was saying. She kept hinting at things without actually saying them outright. Several people had theories about what happened, but Miss Garcia's name kept coming up. People said she knew the truth and should have said something. One comment from 5 years ago said she'd been at some party and saw something she shouldn't have. I saved everything to a folder on my phone called Evidence, even though I wasn't sure what I was gathering evidence for. The next morning I made coffee while Sarah fed the baby his morning bottle. She asked what I planned to do about this whole situation with Davidson and Clay. I told her I needed to find out what really happened to Clay, but I wasn't sure how. She said she supported me but reminded me about the baby's doctor appointment at 2. I promised I wouldn't miss it, then went out on the porch to make a call. Lucy Carpenter picked up on the third ring and sounded surprised to hear from me. I told her I needed to talk to her about something from high school. She got quiet for a second, then asked if this was about Davidson. When I said yes, she agreed to meet me that afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. She warned me that some teachers definitely knew something, but everyone just let it slide because it was complicated. I asked what she meant by complicated, but she said we should talk in person. After we hung up, I sat on the porch steps trying to piece everything together. Davidson had expected Clay in his car, which meant they'd been in contact recently. The thought made me want to throw up. Clay was 28 now, but back in high school he would have been just a kid. I went inside and found Sarah changing the baby's diaper. She looked up at me and could tell something was wrong. I told her about meeting Lucy, and she said to be careful because small towns have long memories. The baby started crying again, and we both focused on getting him settled. His fever was down, but he was still fussy and wouldn't eat much. Sarah walked him around while I cleaned up the kitchen and tried not to think about what Lucy might tell me. My phone buzzed with a text from Chris, finally responding. "Sorry, man, I was drunk last night. We should talk." I texted back asking if he knew about Clay and Davidson, but he didn't answer. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, hoping Chris would text back, but nothing came through. Around lunchtime, I decided to text Clay directly since he needed to know what happened at the reunion. My fingers shook a little as I typed out a message, asking if we could talk about something important. The baby started crying upstairs, and Sarah called down asking me to grab the formula from the kitchen counter. I warmed up the bottle and brought it up to the nursery where Sarah was changing his diaper for the 3rd time that morning. She looked tired, and I could tell she hadn't slept much with the baby's fever keeping him up all night. I took over feeding him while she went to shower, and I stared at my phone screen waiting for Clay to respond. 20 minutes passed before my phone finally buzzed with a text from Clay that just said, "I'm busy." That was it. 2 words after I'd been worrying about him all morning. I texted back mentioning that Davidson had been at the reunion, and something weird happened that involved him. The message showed as read, but Clay didn't type anything back, and the little dots that show someone is typing never appeared. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail, which meant he'd probably turned his phone off or blocked my number temporarily like he did when he didn't want to deal with family stuff. Sarah came out of the bathroom with a towel wrapped around her head and asked if I'd heard from Clay yet. I showed her his 2-word response, and she frowned, saying that wasn't like him to be so short when I mentioned something serious. The baby finished his bottle, and I burped him while Sarah got dressed for the coffee shop meeting with Lucy. She reminded me that Lucy had seemed to know something at the reunion based on how people were acting. I handed the baby to Sarah and grabbed my keys from the counter along with my phone in case Clay decided to call back. The drive to the coffee shop took about 15 minutes, and I found Lucy already waiting at a corner table with her laptop open. She stood up when she saw me and gave me a quick hug before we both sat down, and she turned her laptop screen toward me. There were screenshots from an old Facebook group chat from 10 years ago filling the screen. Lucy scrolled down to a specific conversation where someone had written that the older brother took the heat to protect the younger one. My coffee sat there getting cold as I read through the messages and realized people actually thought I was involved with Davidson to shield Clay from scandal. Lucy pulled up more screenshots showing people arguing about whether it was really me or if I was covering for my brother. Some classmates seemed convinced I'd been the one with Davidson, while others insisted they'd heard it was actually Clay, but the family wanted to protect him. My stomach felt sick reading all these old conversations where people had been discussing this behind my back for years. Lucy mentioned that she'd saved these screenshots back then because something about the whole situation felt wrong. She said, "Miss Garcia had always acted weird about it, like she knew something but couldn't say anything." Lucy scrolled through her contacts on her phone and showed me Miss Garcia's current number from the reunion committee list. She suggested I call her directly since Garcia might be more willing to talk now that we were all adults. I took a picture of the number with my phone and thanked Lucy for showing me all this evidence. Lucy said there were more rumors, but she didn't want to repeat things she wasn't sure about without proof. She closed her laptop and told me to be careful because small towns had long memories about scandals like this. I drove home with my mind racing about what to do with Garcia's number and all this new information. Sarah was in the living room with the baby, who seemed to be feeling better and was playing with his favorite stuffed elephant. I sat down next to them and pulled up Garcia's number on my phone while Sarah watched me with concern. I pressed call and listened to it ring 4 times before Garcia picked up, sounding surprised to hear from me. I told her I needed to ask about something from high school, and there was a long pause before she responded. She started talking in circles about how there were whispers back then, and different stories about different brothers. Every time I tried to get a specific answer, she would hedge and say she didn't really know for sure. Her evasiveness made it obvious she definitely knew more than she was saying, but didn't want to admit it. I asked her directly if she knew about Davidson and Clay, but she just said there were lots of rumors back then. She quickly said she had to go and hung up before I could ask anything else. That evening after dinner, I told Sarah I was thinking about calling the police just to document my concerns about Davidson. She put down the dish she was washing and pointed out that it had been years since high school. She asked what kind of proof I even had besides old rumors and some weird behavior at a reunion. Sarah reminded me the baby had another appointment tomorrow morning at 9, and we needed to focus on that too. I agreed, but said I still felt like I needed to do something to protect Clay, even if he wouldn't talk to me. Sarah dried her hands and said we should sleep on it and decide what to do in the morning with clear heads. The next morning, we got to the pediatrician's office right on time, and the nurse called us back quickly. The doctor started asking about feeding schedules, and I completely blanked on what times the baby usually ate. Sarah had to answer all the questions about sleep patterns and how many wet diapers he'd had in the last day. She gave me a look that said we needed to find balance with this situation and not let it consume everything. The doctor said the baby's fever was gone and he looked healthy, but to keep monitoring him for the next few days. After the appointment, I sat in the car while Sarah buckled the baby into his car seat in the back. I pulled up the non-emergency police number on my phone and pressed call before I could change my mind. The operator transferred me twice before I finally got connected to someone in the right department. Detective Quentin Doyle introduced himself and asked how he could help me today. I explained about the reunion incident and my concerns about Davidson's past behavior with students. Doyle listened without interrupting, and then explained that the statute of limitations might limit what could be done legally. But he encouraged me to make a report anyway, so there would be documentation if anyone else came forward. He took down all my information and said he would open a preliminary file about the matter. Doyle then mentioned that the school district should also be notified since Davidson might still have access to students. He gave me the contact information for their HR department and suggested I document everything I knew in writing. I wrote down the HR contact's name and number while Doyle explained the reporting process to the district. He said, even if criminal charges weren't possible, the school could take administrative action to protect current students. That night after the baby was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop writing out everything that had happened. I started with the reunion incident and Davidson mistaking me for Clay, then added everything I'd learned since then. Sarah came downstairs and read over my shoulder as I typed, helping me organize the timeline more clearly. She pointed out where I was repeating myself and suggested I add more specific details about Davidson's behavior. The baby woke up crying, and Sarah brought him down to feed him while sitting next to me at the table. We worked together with the baby sleeping between us as I finished documenting all the evidence I had. My phone rang suddenly, and Clay's name appeared on the screen for the first time in days. I answered quickly, and he immediately sounded defensive and angry, asking why I was digging all this up now. When I mentioned that Davidson had approached me at the reunion thinking I was him, Clay went completely silent. I asked him directly what happened on his 18th birthday, but the line went dead as he hung up on me. I stared at my phone for a second before putting it down and opening my laptop right there at the kitchen table. The school district website took forever to load, but I finally found the HR department contact form buried under 3 different menus. I typed out everything about Davidson touching me at the reunion and mistaking me for Clay, trying to keep it factual without sounding crazy. The form had a tiny character limit, so I had to delete and rewrite it 3 times to fit everything important. When I hit submit, an auto reply popped up saying someone would respond within 2 business days. 2 days felt like forever, but also weirdly fast for a school district to do anything. I closed the laptop and went to bed but couldn't sleep. Just kept thinking about Clay hanging up on me like that. The next morning my phone rang while I was making coffee, and the caller ID showed the school district's main number. A woman named Leah McCormick introduced herself as the HR intake coordinator and said she'd reviewed my submission from last night. She sounded professional, but also worried, asking if I could come in for a meeting and bring any documentation I had. I grabbed a pen and wrote down the appointment time she gave me for tomorrow afternoon at the district office. She asked if there were any witnesses to the incident, and I told her Chris saw it happen at the reunion. Leah said I should also consider inviting Clay since the situation seemed to involve him directly. She was careful to say it was his choice whether to participate, and there was no pressure either way. After we hung up, I sent Clay a text saying HR wanted to meet, and he was welcome to come if he wanted. I tried to make it sound casual, no pressure, just letting him know the option was there. He didn't respond, but the message showed as read almost immediately, which meant he was at least thinking about it. That afternoon, when Sarah got home from the store with the baby, I told her about the HR meeting. She put the groceries down and asked what would happen if Davidson denied everything or tried to make me look like the bad guy. We sat at the table while the baby played with his toys on the floor between us. Sarah pointed out I'd been on my phone constantly since the reunion and asked if we could set some boundaries. She wasn't mad, but wanted to make sure I was still present for our family while dealing with this situation. We agreed I'd limit the Davidson stuff to certain hours and put my phone away during dinner and bedtime routines. It felt good to have a plan that wouldn't let this completely take over our lives. Late that night after everyone was asleep, I found my old journal from high school in a box in the closet. I flipped to the pages around my 18th birthday, but there wasn't much there, just some drunk scribbles about the party. The entry for the next day just said I woke up on the lawn and felt like garbage all day. Reading it made me realize how many gaps there were in my memory from that time. I wondered what else I might have missed or forgotten about during those years. The journal made me feel weird, so I put it away and tried to sleep, but kept thinking about Clay. The next morning, Leah called again while I was feeding the baby his breakfast. She gave me the names of 3 therapists who specialized in situations like this, reading their phone numbers slowly so I could write them down. She explained the investigation process would be thorough, but might take several weeks or even months to complete. The district had to interview multiple people and review any evidence before making any decisions about Davidson. She scheduled our in-person meeting for next Tuesday and said to bring any screenshots or photos I had. I spent the rest of the day trying to act normal, but kept checking my phone hoping Clay would respond. That evening, I was washing dishes when I heard a knock at the door. Through the window, I could see Clay standing on the porch, looking tired and scared. Sarah saw him too, and immediately picked up the baby, saying she'd give us some privacy upstairs. Clay came in and sat on the couch like his whole body was too heavy to hold up anymore. He stared at his hands for a long time before saying anything. Finally, he told me Davidson had started messaging him on Facebook when he was 17. At first, it was just comments on his posts, but then Davidson started sending private messages. Clay said they were friendly at first, talking about college plans and stuff, but got weird closer to his birthday. He kept stopping to take deep breaths, his hands shaking a little as he talked. On his 18th birthday, Davidson invited him over to help with some yard work for extra money. Clay went because he needed cash for college and didn't think anything bad would happen. He said something did happen at Davidson's house, but he couldn't say the exact words out loud. The way Clay's voice cracked made it clear enough without him having to spell it out. He explained that some kids at the school found out somehow, and rumors started spreading. But the rumors got twisted and people started thinking it was me instead of him. Clay said a few people knew the truth, but everyone just pretended not to know anything. He looked at me for the first time and said he was sorry I got pulled into his mess. I told him it wasn't his fault and asked if he wanted to go to the police. Clay shook his head hard, saying he couldn't handle that kind of process and publicity, but he said he might be willing to meet with HR if they could keep his name somewhat private. I promised to support whatever boundaries he needed and wouldn't push him to do anything he wasn't ready for. Tuesday morning came faster than expected, and Clay showed up at my door wearing a button-down shirt I hadn't seen him wear since our cousin's wedding 3 years ago. We drove to the school district office in silence, except for the radio playing some old rock station Clay kept switching between different songs. The building looked exactly the same as when I'd come here years ago to pick up my diploma after missing graduation from mono. Leah met us in the lobby wearing a gray suit and carrying a thick folder with tabs sticking out the sides. She led us to a conference room with water bottles already set out on the table and a box of tissues in the center that made my stomach tighten. Clay sat down first and started picking at the label on his water bottle while I pulled out my phone to show the screenshots I'd saved. Leah opened her folder and clicked her pen, asking Clay to start wherever he felt comfortable. Clay's voice cracked on the first word, but then he started talking faster, explaining how Davidson first commented on his social media posts about track meets and school projects. He described the messages getting more personal, asking about his weekend plans and if he needed help with college applications. Clay's hands shook as he talked about Davidson offering him yard work for cash right before his 18th birthday. He stopped several times to drink water and catch his breath, but kept going, explaining how Davidson had beer at his house and kept refilling Clay's glass even though Clay said he needed to drive home. The details came out in pieces about Davidson putting on music and sitting too close on the couch, then suggesting they move somewhere more comfortable. Clay couldn't say exactly what happened next, but the way his whole body tensed told us enough. I showed Leah the screenshots from the alumni Facebook group and the photo of Davidson's car from the reunion night, plus the weird messages people had sent me since then. Leah took photos of everything with her district phone and made notes in her folder, asking Clay a few questions about dates and if anyone else knew at the time. Clay mentioned telling one friend who moved away after graduation, but nobody else because he was too ashamed and confused about what had happened. Leah closed her folder and explained the investigation would take several weeks minimum because they had to interview Davidson, review his personnel file, and check if other complaints existed. She said Davidson would be notified within 48 hours and likely placed on leave during the investigation, though his union rep would probably fight it. The district couldn't guarantee criminal charges since Clay wasn't filing a police report, but they could take employment action if the investigation supported Clay's account. She pulled out a business card for Ramona Yates, explaining she was a therapist who worked specifically with people who'd experienced similar situations and took the district's insurance. Clay took the card and put it in his pocket without looking at it, while Leah explained we'd get updates as the investigation progressed, but some information would stay confidential for legal reasons. After we left the building, Clay asked me to drop him at his apartment because he needed to be alone for a while. I drove home and immediately called Detective Doyle from the card he'd given me earlier. He answered on the second ring and listened while I explained Clay had made a statement to the school district, but still wouldn't file criminal charges. Doyle said he'd document everything anyway in case other victims came forward later, or Clay changed his mind within the statute of limitations. He asked for Leah's contact information to coordinate between agencies, and said this kind of documentation could help establish a pattern even without formal charges. 2 days passed with no news until Thursday afternoon when Leah called while I was changing the baby's diaper. She said Davidson had been notified that morning and immediately placed on administrative leave, pending the investigation. His lawyer was already involved, claiming everything was a misunderstanding, and Davidson was just being friendly with former students like any dedicated teacher would be. The union was backing him for now, but Leah said that could change if more information came out during the investigation. That evening, I checked Facebook and saw Lucy had posted in the alumni group asking anyone with information about inappropriate behavior from the school staff to contact the district HR department directly. The comments started immediately with people saying this was a witch hunt, and others saying it was about time someone spoke up. My messenger started pinging nonstop with private messages from classmates I hadn't talked to in years. One girl from my biology class said Davidson used to make comments about her outfits that made her uncomfortable. A guy from the baseball team said Davidson always volunteered to supervise their overnight trips and would check on certain players multiple times during the night. Another message said Davidson had been moved between 3 different schools in the district over 15 years, which seemed suspicious now. People shared stories about weird comments, too long hugs, and invitations to his house that felt wrong, but they couldn't explain why at the time. I was reading through the messages when Sarah came downstairs carrying the baby, whose face was bright red with fever. She took his temperature while I kept scrolling through messages, and when the thermometer beeped showing 103 degrees, she asked if I could put the phone down and help. I drove to the pharmacy for fever medicine, while she gave him a lukewarm bath, but my phone kept buzzing in my pocket the whole time. When I got home, Sarah was walking circles around the living room with the crying baby while trying to get him to take his pacifier. She looked exhausted, and when my phone rang again, she asked if we could set some boundaries around this Davidson situation. She understood it was important, but pointed out I'd been on my phone constantly for days, while our sick baby needed both parents present. We agreed I'd only deal with Davidson stuff between 7 and 9 at night, after the baby's bedtime routine, unless something truly urgent happened. The next morning, Clay texted that he'd scheduled an appointment with the therapist for Monday afternoon. I offered to drive him, but he said he needed to do this part alone, though he appreciated the support. I wanted to insist on going with him, but remembered my promise not to push him beyond his comfort zone. Over the weekend, Leah called to say 3 more former students had contacted HR with their own complaints about Davidson's behavior. She couldn't share details, but said the pattern was becoming clear, and the investigation was expanding beyond just Clay's situation. The school board was taking this seriously now, and had hired an outside investigator to ensure thoroughness and avoid any appearance of bias. Sunday night, I was giving the baby his bottle when Facebook Messenger popped up with Davidson's name. My hands started shaking as I read his message saying he'd sue me for defamation if I didn't stop spreading lies about him. He claimed I was trying to destroy his reputation over some imagined slight from years ago, and his lawyer would be contacting me soon. I took a screenshot and immediately forwarded it to both Leah and Detective Doyle without responding to Davidson directly. Doyle called within an hour saying this could be considered witness intimidation and to save everything, but not engage with Davidson at all. Monday evening, Clay came over after his therapy appointment looking drained, but somehow lighter than he'd been in days. He said Ramona was helpful, and they'd scheduled weekly sessions to work through everything that happened and how it affected his life since then. We sat in the kitchen while Sarah put the baby to bed and decided we needed to tell our parents before they heard rumors around town. Clay worried they'd blame themselves or treat him differently, but agreed it was better than them finding out through gossip at the grocery store. We drove to our parents' house together the next night after dinner. Mom was loading the dishwasher when we arrived, and Dad was watching the news in his recliner like every other Tuesday for the past 30 years. Clay asked them to turn off the TV and sit down because we had something important to discuss. I let Clay lead the conversation, only adding details when he looked at me for help. Mom's face went white when Clay explained about Davidson, and she grabbed his hand across the table. Dad stood up and paced around the room, his jaw clenched tight as Clay continued talking. When Clay finished, Mom admitted she'd heard whispers at a school fundraiser years ago about Davidson being too friendly with students. Dad said a colleague had mentioned something similar once, but he dismissed it as jealous gossip about a popular teacher. They both looked sick, realizing they'd ignored warning signs that might have protected Clay or others. Mom kept apologizing and crying while Dad said he wanted to go find Davidson right now, though we talked him out of that quickly. The conversation went in circles with them blaming themselves despite Clay saying it wasn't their fault. We stayed until almost midnight, nobody really knowing what to say, but nobody ready to leave either. The next morning, Mom called me 3 times before noon, each time crying harder than the last. She kept saying she should have known something was wrong when Clay stopped playing soccer his senior year. Dad went to the hardware store and came back with nothing, then went again an hour later. He kept clenching and unclenching his fists while staring at old photos of Clay's birthday parties. Mom pulled out Clay's high school yearbook and traced her finger over his senior photo where his smile looked forced. She remembered how he'd started locking his bedroom door and stopped bringing friends over, but she'd thought it was just teenage stuff. Dad admitted he'd noticed Clay flinch when male teachers patted his shoulder at graduation, but figured he was just nervous about college. They spent the whole day going through old memories with new understanding, each realization making them feel worse. Clay texted me that Ramona had called him about scheduling our joint session for Thursday afternoon. He said he wasn't sure about it, but Ramona thought it might help us both process the brother dynamics of this whole mess. I told him I'd be there for whatever he needed, trying not to sound too eager about the chance to support him properly. Wednesday morning, Leah called to update me on the investigation progress. 3 more former students had officially filed complaints with HR about Davidson's behavior over the years. She said one was from 5 years ago, another from 8 years ago, and the third from just last year. The pattern was becoming undeniable, even though Davidson's lawyer kept sending letters claiming this was all a misunderstanding. She mentioned the complaints all described similar behavior, including inappropriate touching, suggestive comments, and attempts to meet students outside school. The school board had scheduled a disciplinary hearing for the following Tuesday based on the preliminary findings. Davidson's lawyer immediately filed a motion to delay it, arguing they needed more time to prepare their defense. The board denied the delay request, given the seriousness of the multiple complaints and the need to protect current students. Leah said Davidson would remain on administrative leave until the hearing determined his employment status. That evening, Sarah sat me down after putting the baby to sleep and said we needed to establish some boundaries. She understood this situation was important, but pointed out I'd been on my phone constantly for over a week now. We agreed to have device-free evenings from 6 to 9, except for true emergencies. She also asked if we could share baby duties more evenly since I'd been distracted during feedings and diaper changes lately. I realized she was right, and we started a new routine where I handled bath time while she did story time. The structure actually helped me focus better on both family and the Davidson situation without feeling pulled in different directions constantly. Thursday's joint therapy session with Clay and Ramona was harder than I expected. Ramona had us sit facing each other while she asked questions about our childhood and how this situation affected our relationship. Clay admitted he'd resented me for years thinking I knew what happened and chose to ignore it. I explained how the rumors got twisted and people thought it was me, which protected him in a weird way, but also isolated both of us. We talked about the guilt I felt for not protecting him and his anger that I hadn't noticed something was wrong. Ramona helped us see how Davidson had damaged our whole family, not just Clay directly. By the end, we weren't completely healed, but at least we understood each other better. Friday afternoon, Clay surprised me by saying he wanted to post something in the alumni Facebook group. He'd written a brief statement correcting the old rumors without going into graphic details about what actually happened. He wanted people to know the truth even if it was uncomfortable for everyone who'd spread gossip for years. I helped him edit it to be clear but not too revealing, focusing on the fact that Davidson had targeted him, not me. He posted it that evening, and within an hour had over 50 reactions and dozens of comments. Some people apologized for believing the wrong story, others shared their own suspicions about Davidson, and a few accused Clay of lying for attention. Tommy wrote a long apology saying he'd always suspected something, but never spoke up because it seemed like gossip. Miss Garcia commented that she was sorry for not reporting what she'd heard to proper authorities years ago. The responses kept coming all weekend, creating a record of how many people knew something was wrong, but stayed quiet. Tuesday's disciplinary hearing lasted 4 hours according to Leah's later call. Davidson showed up in a suit, with 2 lawyers, who argued this was all hearsay and vengeful lies from disgruntled former students. The school board reviewed the HR investigation findings, including the documented patterns of behavior across multiple years. They asked Davidson directly about specific incidents, but he refused to answer on advice of counsel. After deliberating for less than an hour, the board voted unanimously to terminate Davidson's employment immediately. He was also banned from all school property and prohibited from attending any school events or contacting current students. His lawyers threatened to sue for wrongful termination, but the board stood firm on their decision. Davidson had to turn in his keys and was escorted out by security while parents in the audience applauded. Wednesday morning, Detective Doyle called with unexpected news about the criminal investigation. 2 other people had filed police reports after seeing Clay's Facebook post and realizing they weren't alone. One incident was from 3 years ago, well within the statute of limitations for criminal prosecution. The other was from just 18 months ago, involving a student who just turned 18 at the time. While Clay's case was too old for criminal charges, these newer cases meant Davidson now faced potential prosecution. Doyle said the district attorney was reviewing the cases and would likely file charges within the month. Clay continued his weekly therapy sessions with Ramona and told me he felt stronger after each one. He still had hard days where the memories overwhelmed him, but was learning coping strategies that actually helped. Ramona was teaching him to separate his identity from what happened, to see himself as more than just Davidson's victim. He started journaling and even joined an online support group for male survivors, though he mostly just read others' posts. The progress wasn't linear, but each week brought small improvements in how he carried himself and engaged with the world. 3 weeks after the disciplinary hearing, the State Board of Education revoked Davidson's teaching license permanently. The decision came after reviewing the school district's investigation findings and the multiple complaints filed over the years. Davidson's lawyer stopped sending threatening messages to everyone involved, probably realizing that fighting this would mean more details becoming public record. The local newspaper ran a small article about the license revocation, though they couldn't print names due to privacy laws. Sarah found a couples therapist through her insurance and booked us an appointment for the following week. We sat on opposite ends of a brown couch in the therapist's office while she asked us questions about how the Davidson situation had affected our marriage. Sarah explained how she felt pushed aside when I got obsessed with finding out the truth, and I realized I'd been putting Clay's needs ahead of our family without meaning to. The therapist gave us homework to schedule specific times for dealing with family issues so they wouldn't take over everything else. We started having coffee together every morning before the baby woke up, just 15 minutes to check in with each other about normal stuff. Clay called me excited one afternoon because he'd gotten his acceptance letter from the graphic design program at the community college. He'd applied weeks ago, but hadn't told anyone in case he got rejected. He said dealing with the Davidson stuff had cleared his head and made him realize he'd been stuck for years, afraid to move forward with anything. The program started in January, and he was already looking at the required supplies list and watching YouTube tutorials about design software. My phone started buzzing with messages from teachers at our old school after the newspaper article came out. Miss Garcia sent a long email saying she should have reported what she heard years ago instead of just gossiping about it. 3 other teachers reached out with similar apologies, all saying they'd suspected something but didn't want to get involved without proof. Their messages felt genuine, even though it was way too late to actually help. Detective Doyle called, with news that made Clay pump his fist in the air when I told him. The district attorney had filed charges against Davidson for 2 counts of inappropriate conduct with minors based on the recent cases. Clay's situation was too old to prosecute, but the newer cases meant Davidson would face real criminal consequences. The charges included 1 count from 3 years ago and another from just 18 months back, both involving students who'd recently turned 18. Our parents started inviting us over for Sunday dinners again, something we'd stopped doing when things got tense after telling them about Clay. Mom set clear rules that we wouldn't talk about Davidson unless Clay brought it up himself. These dinners helped rebuild our relationships as we talked about normal things like the baby learning to crawl and Dad's new woodworking projects. Clay seemed more relaxed at these meals, actually laughing at Dad's bad jokes instead of sitting silent like before. The criminal case moved slowly through the system, with multiple court dates getting postponed for various legal reasons. Davidson's lawyer kept filing motions to dismiss, but the judge denied them all based on the evidence from multiple victims. After 4 months of legal back and forth, Davidson's lawyer approached the prosecutor about a plea deal. Davidson agreed to plead guilty to the lesser charges in exchange for avoiding trial and the possibility of jail time. The deal included 3 years probation, mandatory registration as a sex offender, and 200 hours of community service. Some people thought he got off too easy, but Clay said he was just glad it was over and that Davidson had to admit guilt publicly. The sex offender registration meant Davidson couldn't live near schools or work with kids ever again, which felt like real justice even without jail time. Clay found a volunteer position with an organization that helps male survivors of abuse, working their hotline 2 nights a week. He had to complete 40 hours of training first, learning how to listen without giving advice and how to provide resources without pushing. After his first real shift, he came to our house looking exhausted but somehow lighter, saying it felt good to help someone else who was struggling with similar stuff. He kept volunteering even after starting his design program, saying it made him feel strong instead of weak. 6 months after that reunion, our whole family was in a completely different place than where we'd started. The baby was walking everywhere and getting into everything, keeping Sarah and me busy but happy. Clay was doing great in his design program and had even gotten a part-time job doing social media graphics for a local business. Sarah and I were solid again after working through our issues in therapy and learning to communicate better. Davidson was just a name in the sex offender registry that we never had to think about anymore. Clay still had tough days, but he had tools to handle them now, and our family had learned how to support each other without letting crisis take over our lives. The whole town knew the truth now, not the twisted rumors from years ago, but what really happened, and that public acknowledgement had freed all of us to move forward. Well, folks, that's all the time we've got together today. Thanks for letting me question things right alongside you, until we run into each other again. Like the video, it helps more than you think.